Okay, so we're back. We're back, children, dear children, we are back. Okay, so we talked about, before the break, we talked about ways Islam spread. Turns out it can spread peacefully through trade, for example. We talked that it could spread violently, like it did in Spain. We'll talk a bit more about that tomorrow. And we also talked about it could spread through trans-Saharan Africa, also the east coast of Africa. And we saw that how here it creates even influence of different languages. The next line on the handout says Arab trading posts. There was the growth of commerce and trade. Islam helps promote, we'll write down, peaceful trade. It helped promote peaceful trade. So that is the thing about Islam, is like, for sure it could spread violently, but also it could spread through peaceful trade. Below that, it says that the Arab conquerors were a self-isolating, ruling, you'll write down the word minority. Because even though they conquered this empire, that's a good-looking size empire, but the Arabs are only from this part of their empire, and so the majority aren't from where the empire starts, and so the Arabs that beat up everyone are the minority, and the non-Arabs are the majority. It says they lived, in fact, on the tax support of the non-Muslim, you'll write down non-Arab majority. They lived on the tax support of the non-Muslim, non-Arab majority. Because if you're not a Muslim, you have to pay a tax, right? And that's why it says on the next line, it says that there was actually no reason to support conversion by missionary activity or by the sword. In other words, they're never going to go up and say, hey, convert or die. Why would I want you to die? If you die, you cannot pay me any taxes. If you convert to Islam, you cannot pay me any taxes. It says that non-Muslims had to pay this tax. In Arabic, the word is called the jizya tax, which we'll write down is a freedom of religion tax. Freedom of religion tax. This jizya tax is a freedom of religion tax. So now we're going to transition, and for the rest of our time, we're going to talk about one of the dynasties. There are two dynasties we should talk about. Both are on the screen. The one on the top is called the Umayyad. The one on the bottom is the Abbasid. They almost look identical. There's not a whole bunch of difference, but there is a difference in how they act, and we want to make sure we know about that. First of all, for the Umayyads, that we have the first line. It says Damascus, Syria. We'll write down that this is their capital. Damascus, Syria, this is their capital. And we're going to write down below that, it says that their focus, it says on the handout, was political rather than, we'll write down, religious. And what I mean by this was that they were not known to be like the best Muslims. They were supposed to be, the leaders were supposed to be Muslim, but they didn't always act like the way they were supposed to be. In fact, it says on the handout, they often were corrupt. You know, they took bribes, they did things they weren't supposed to. For example, what drink are Muslims not supposed to drink? But these Muslim leaders, the Umayyad leaders, often did drink alcohol. So they were corrupt, they were not solid, they were often doing things they should not do. And in fact, they also, not only were they corrupt, but they limited leadership to, we'll write down, Arabs. And if you have a huge empire going from India to Persia to Mesopotamia to the Middle East to Spain and North Africa, and you say of all these different areas, of these three continents, only people from the Arab region can get a job that's in the government, that's going to cause some problems. That's going to cause some problems. And so it says on the handout below that, they limited leadership to the Arabs, and now there's a vocabulary word you should know. It's a vocabulary word that I have highlighted, I have bolded, I have underlined it. It's important. It's an Arabic word you should know. It's the word Dar al-Islam. Now, this word Dar al-Islam, it literally means, according to your handout, what? House of Islam, but there's a practical meaning that we want to write down. We want to write down that this practically means lands controlled by Muslims. Lands controlled by Muslims. That's what it means to be part of Dar al-Islam. If you live in a Muslim-run country, you're part of Dar al-Islam. So, for example, today, Egypt, it's a Muslim majority. It's part of Dar al-Islam. Saudi Arabia, Muslim majority. It's part of Dar al-Islam. Would Mexico be part of Dar al-Islam? We don't know if Mexico is a majority Muslim. When you think of Mexico, oh yes, the Muslim country. They pray 5 times a day. I always see women covered. Is Mexico a Muslim majority country? It's definitely Catholic. Like the Virgin Mary, it's not a Muslim thing. Statues, not a Muslim thing. So is Mexico part of Dar al-Islam? No. Is the United States? No, because we're not a Muslim majority. If you're a Muslim majority nation, you're part of Dar al-Islam. If you're like the United States, or if you're like Mexico, or if you're like Russia, you're part of what's called Dar al-Harb, which means literally on your handout, the House of War. We'll write down these are non-Muslim countries. Non-Muslim countries. They're called the House of War because they're not Muslim. It's okay for me to fight. It's okay for me to invade. It's okay for me to go to war with them. They are a non-Muslim country. So, as I mentioned, they're not super interested in like forcing conversion. By 750, what percent of Umayyads were Muslim? We'll write down only 10%. Only 10% of the population was Muslim because for the most part, I don't want and I don't need you to convert. If you convert, you're not paying the tax. So in the Umayyad dynasty, only 10% of the empire was Muslim. And sadly, there's a lot of corruption among those 10%. It says that the irreligious behavior of the rulers, we'll write down, was well known. Their bad behavior, they're getting drunk, they're cheating on their wives, they're doing these wrong things. It was well known. And it was so bad, we'll write down, that non-Arab Muslims felt like they were treated as second-class citizens because the only good jobs came to you if you were an Arab. The only good opportunities came to you if you were an Arab. But most of that empire in green, they weren't Arabs. They weren't Arabic speaking. They were Spanish or North Africans or Indians or Mesopotamians. And so most of that map, most of that empire felt, man, we're kind of getting like really taken advantage of here. Because all these ethnic groups felt taken advantage of, people finally decide enough's enough, and guess what they do? They rebel. And by 750, the Umayyad Empire, we'll write down, had fallen apart. By 750, it had fallen apart. And finally, for this section, the end of the Umayyad Empire, there's one group of the leadership that decides to flee for somewhere. There's a word on the handout called al-Andalus. This is a word you should really know. It's a vocabulary term. And it says that some of the Umayyad leadership escaped, we'll write down, to Muslim Spain. And that's actually what the word al-Andalus means. That's the word for Muslim Spain. And it's a word that we're going to repeat and talk about actually in the homework this evening and from here on out for some time. So with that being said, we finished talking about the rise of the Caliphate. We know a Caliphate is a government ruled by a caliph that mixes religion of Islam with government. We talked about as they spread politically, they also spread their religion of Islam. That's called Islamization. They spread their language. We call that Arabization. We compare that to the British. When the British went to India, they brought English. When the British went to Kenya, they brought English. When the British came to Pakistan, they brought English. Everywhere the Muslims go, we talked about Arabic. We also talked about that some parts of the world, Islam comes through peace, like East Africa, like sub-Saharan Africa. We also identified one part of the map where Islam does not come by peace. What part of the world was that? violently conquered? Spain and the Iberian Peninsula more generally. In fact, we said that they actually had to stop them from taking over France. We also talked about how Islam influences language. There's a brand new language created with a mixture of Arabic. What brand new language is that? It's a mixture. Swahili. Swahili. It's a brand new language. We talked about that Arabs help promote trade because a lot of people said, hey, we're just going to become Muslims, so peaceful trade increases. We identified the very first Muslim dynasty as the Umayyad dynasty, but we said they were corrupt, they were not great Muslims, and what types of ethnic group did they give the best jobs to? Arabs, right? And that meant everyone else on the map who was not an Arab, even if they're a Muslim, they felt left out. This created internal problems. It led to rebellion and to the end of the Umayyad dynasty. Okay, with that being done, we're actually going to stop here. There's a video that you'll use online to finish out the rest of the notes, the Abbasid dynasty notes. That will be finished, and this handout will be submitted by midnight tonight. So with that, we have come to a close in our class time. We finished just a bit early. You'll use the notes posted online to complete Rise and Fall of the Caliphate. Actually sent out that link on the Remind account, just to let you know. So with that, we are done. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. See you later.